Recently, the Palm Springs Kiwanis Club had another great speaker. Let's listen in.
Dennis Daly heard me speak to the little Burbank Middle School children, and I told them I was a part of the group that liberated Booking Wall concentration camp. The little boy in the back of the room said, that never happened. I said, don't say that! I was there! As a result for that, Dennis said, you ought to get a little 501c3 nonprofit corporation and talk to schools. He worked on that, and I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And he did take care of it. A year and a half later, the IRS and the California State Legislation gave me a 501c3 nonprofit corporation mission statement, as Dennis Daly's words are, to instill in California youth a sense of civic nonpartisan pride and a better understanding of our common heritage through the use of visual, non-visual programs and personal appearances. And I thought, God, now I can go to schools and talk about America, which I've done. It's my passion. So we'll do this after it's over, but now I want you to just pretend something. I want you to pretend that you're one of the groups that I'm talking to in school. You're about 13, 14 years old. We've sat down, I've been introduced. Young leaders of tomorrow, you own this country. Those people in Washington work for us, we don't work for them. So if you find something's not in the Constitution, question it, because they're rewriting history. Now, I thought I was a patriot, young leaders of tomorrow, but I ran across a story that I'd forgotten, but due to passage of time, and when I went over it again, Dennis helped me with it, and it says such as something that should be sung and told to from everybody across the country. There once was a young lawyer named Francis Scott Key. He was a brilliant attorney and had a flair for poetry. Many of us memorized this when we were young. You ask your parents when you get home if they don't remember it when they were young too. And it's in most hymnals of churches throughout America. The poem that he wrote was a miracle. How it was written, the time, what had happened. But then again, your parents will tell you that there was a guy they remember on television called Paul Harvey. And he used to have a program and say, now you know the rest of the story. When you find out how the music to this special poem was written and how it came about to become our national anthem, you'll say that too is a miracle. So much has been going on, but this all started after we had won our independence from the mother country, England. The 13 states, colonies have become states. And now 36 years later, they're at war again with the mother country, England, in what we call the War of 1812. All of our American prisoners were in chains down in ships below decks. The scene of this is going to take place in Baltimore Harbor. 1814 is when it takes place. All of the British prisoners were on land in prisons. Our people in Washington talking one day, they said, our guys are dying out there in filth and in chains. What if we could do something to get them home? So why don't we see about exchanging prisoners? Francis Scott Key said, I'll go. So on the appointed day, he got in a little rowboat and rowed 1,000 yards out to the Admiralty ship. He got on top at Admiral Cochrane. He told him, he said, well, no, change prisoners. And they came to a conclusion they could do it. He said, may I go down and talk to the man? He said, yes. So he goes downstairs and he said, fellas, I got news for you. Tonight you're going to be free. You're going to go home to your family. What? He said, yes, I just made arrangements with the Admiral Cochrane that we're going to exchange prisoners. And so you'll be free. And they said, oh, Francis, thank you. He said, here's what I'll do. I'll go back all. And then when we get ready, we'll come down. I'll get you out of these chains. We'll go back together. And they said, thank you. He gets on deck and the Admiral walks over and says, Mr. Key, we got a little problem here. What's that? Well, it's not really a problem. We're going to honor our commitment to let those men go free. But after tonight, it should be academic. They're going to be free anyway because the war ends tonight. So what? He said, war will be over tonight, so they'll be able to go free. So it wouldn't make any difference. What are you talking about? Well, all right. Do you see that great big old red, white, and blue flag that's on top of that rampart over at Fort McHenry? He said, certainly. He said, we just sent an ultimatum to the commandant. If he doesn't bring that flag down, we're going to blow the flag and Fort McHenry right off the face of the earth. You know what? You heard me. We're going to blow that flag and Fort McHenry right off the face of the earth. He said, how are you going to do that? He said, will you turn around and look at the horizon? He looked around and does just little dots all over. Admiral Walker says, that's the entire British Armada. All of the gunpowder will be here within 2.5 hours, so you can see the war is over. Wait a minute, you can't bomb that fort. It's not a military fort. It's full of women and children. Don't worry, you got a way out. What do you mean? I told you, once they lower that flag, we'll know you've surrendered and you're once more under British rule. May I go back down and talk to the men now? Certainly, take your time. We got over 2 hours before they get here. Key gets down and tells them, he said, fellas, I'm sorry. Admiral has just given an ultimatum. He told them what it was. He said, how many ships do you see? He said, over 100. He said, I don't know. And he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go back on deck and I'll tell you what's happening in the war. And they said, okay. So he goes back up there and twilight's about to fall now. There's a haze over the bay, and suddenly all the gunpowder started from that British group of ships. All he could hear from below, the men said, where's the flag? Is it still flying? Is it still up? Every time a bomb would burst near the flag, he would see it there, and he said, it's still up. It's still flying. And then Admiral Walker, what the hell is wrong with these idiots? Why don't you bring down that flag? Don't they realize this is an impossible situation? Key said, Admiral, George Washington said the one thing that separates us from any other nation, we'd rather die on our feet than live on our knees. That's very commendable. You wish you had a place to pray on your knees. I'm going to order those guns to go right for that flag. It's going to come down. Here's one thing we don't understand. What's that? Well, reconnaissance tells us we've hit that flag, but it's still flying. I don't understand that. But they'll find out the power. So the next 2 or 3 hours, he just absolutely couldn't believe what had happened. He heard the men down below say, God, keep that flag flying where they saw it last night. Finally, the silence. And then the dawn comes up and he sees the flag. He's at an odd angle, but it's disheveled, completely destroyed. And Key got in the little rowboat, rowed all the way over there and got up the rampart. When he got there, he said, now I know why the flag is still flying. Those were Patriots' bodies there. Every time it would hit and fall, other fathers would come up and remove those bodies and hold the flag up because they knew the importance of having it fly. That's when Keyes said, oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? On down to, oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave?
A Pirate Saves America by Dennis Daly. Hello, this is Jimmy Weldon. Many of you who have heard me speak before know that I love to be a storyteller. The great Orson Welles was once asked whether he wanted to be remembered as a stage producer, a radio actor, movie star, or what. His answer was, remember me as a storyteller. I love to tell the story of Old Glory. I like to think that a lot of young people have been fascinated by the story I tell about that huge flag that flew above the ramparts of Fort McHenry in the harbor of Baltimore in the closing weeks of the War of 1812. The story of that flag and the men and women who died keeping it flying is one of extreme American patriotism. The poem that the young lawyer Francis Scott Key wrote about seeing that flag fly, still waving in the morning breeze, became our national anthem. Long before people sang it, Key's poem had become a kind of early American bestseller. Everyone knew it. People would recite it over and over again. Then, one night, a group of young Americans sitting at one side in a tavern heard some British immigrants across the room singing an English drinking song. The funny thing about the song was that its rhythm, its meter, exactly matched the word pattern of Key's poem. They began singing Key's poem in that old, irreverent British song, and the musical version of the Star-Spangled Banner was born. What an irony! How a poem about the persistent patriotism of the people of Fort McHenry, holding up a tattered but triumphant stars and stripes, should be sung to the melody of a song that came from England, the country whose navy could not bring down that flag. After the overnight unsuccessful bombardment of Fort McHenry by the British, the admiral of the fleet, who had promised to bomb the fort into dust, saw Old Glory was still flying high. It appears that the hopes and blood of fired-up Americans holding that flag aloft, leaning their wounded and soon-to-die bodies against the flagpole, were stronger than the bombs and shells of the most powerful navy in the world. But you see, we had something the British didn't. We had a burning fire to preserve the freedom we had won years before. Those loyal British sailors were fighting for their empire. We were fighting for our liberty. And the symbol of that liberty was still waving in the morning breeze, painting the story of our freedoms on the morning air. The fleet's loss at Fort McHenry was a bitter pill for the British Navy. Admiral Alexander Cochrane took his fleet out of the harbor with the tide. Unable to defeat the Americans at Baltimore, Cochrane and his ships sailed south along the coast, then around Florida and headed for Louisiana. Along the coast, Cochrane's humiliated fleet did win a small victory, but Cochrane was anxious to move on to New Orleans. His forces were to support a contingent of British troops already standing by. If Cochrane could help the British Army take the port at New Orleans, America's southern gateway would be closed. Maybe he could do at New Orleans what he had failed to do at Baltimore. The news of the coming of the British fleet was the big buzz in the bayous of southern Louisiana, and no one was more upset in hearing the news than a French-Canadian leader of men named Jean Lafitte. Lafitte was an organizer, a scoundrel, but most importantly, he was a pirate. Jean Lafitte and his men were making runs into the Caribbean, attacking any ship they could, killing or wounding the crews, and making off with the treasures on board. Lafitte loved the bayous of Louisiana and knew them like the back of his hand. He and his ships would sail out of the Caribbean and disappear into the swamps. After sorting out the loot, the best of the goods were taken by a small boat to the docks at New Orleans. They were put into wagons and taken to a warehouse for sale. The arrangement was very cozy. The man who owned the warehouse, a man whom the public thought was just your average honest man, was Jean Lafitte's brother, Pierre. A large area south of New Orleans was the home to Lafitte and his pack of pirates. The area is called Barataria. When Lafitte heard about British fleet coming, he was worried. The American forces left Lafitte alone while he plundered the Caribbean, but the British might be harsher on Lafitte and his men. The future of Barataria was in jeopardy. Lafitte didn't want any military presence in the area. And remember, Lafitte was a French Canadian. He wanted nothing to do with the British. The British had burned Washington, tried to take Baltimore, and now were about to attack the Americans in New Orleans. If they could be successful there, they might win the War of 1812 and take back the colonies they had lost in the Revolutionary War. But it was at New Orleans the spirit of the new nation would emerge as the real winner. The leader of the American forces at New Orleans was Andrew Jackson. We know now that he would defeat the British and eventually use his status as a war hero to become president. What we forget, and what most students of American history are never told, is that Jackson almost lost the Battle of New Orleans. He was facing the same kind of expected destruction they had faced at Baltimore. It was a foregone conclusion that Jackson's American flag would not be flying after the final battle. Andy Jackson, the mountain man from Tennessee, was not about to let that happen. But Jackson faced a dilemma, a shortage of manpower. Now, although he was a master of the Tennessee mountains, he knew nothing about the swamps and bayous of Louisiana. He needed men who knew the area and hated the British. Today, we would call it a no-brainer. But then, it was the answer to an American prayer. Jackson called for Lafitte. At first, the king of the pirates was skeptical of Jackson. Lafitte would be happy to fight the British, but he and his men were already in hot water with the Americans. They were criminals. They were pirates. As a matter of fact, just weeks earlier, Lafitte had met with a British officer. The pirates were given the chance to fight on the side of the British. Jackson heard about the meeting and acted quickly. He would offer Lafitte and his men amnesty. He would offer them the chance to clear their slates if, and this is a big if they agreed to become good Americans and fight for the Stars and Stripes. Lafitte was under the gun. The U.S. civil leader in Louisiana had already called for his arrest, and his brother was already in jail. Which way should he go? Lafitte and his men were not about to abandon their bases in Barataria, but they could not remain neutral. So, in what is now regarded as another magic moment in American history, the pirate king Jean Lafitte teamed up with the mountain man Andy Jackson to battle the British in what became the final battle of the War of 1812. Lafitte told his men they would be fighting under a new flag. So the Jolly Roger came down and was replaced with the Stars and Stripes. They joined the ranks of the Americans. Some went aboard U.S. ships. Imagine pirates boarding American vessels, not to pillage and plunder, but to instruct the captains how to navigate the dangerous waters of the Louisiana bayous. With the help of Lafitte and his men, Andy Jackson prevailed. The War of 1812 effectively came to an end. Just think, America using a combination of military men and newly obtained forces, an international group of pirates who brought their know-how from all over the world, defeated the British in a battle that once and for all showed England that America and the Stars and Stripes were here to stay. But wait, this is not the end of the story. The Battle of New Orleans was an unnecessary fight. What? Yes. You see, Washington and London had already signed a treaty that ended the war. A treaty signed 2 months after the battle at Fort McHenry. Remember, this was a long time ago, friends. Word had never gotten to New Orleans that the war was over. Men fought and died to win a war that had already been won. Now, had Jackson and Lafitte and Cochrane known the treaty had already been signed, Lafitte's men would not have joined the United States, and the battle that put the nail on the coffin for Britain would never have taken place. There's a moral here. Right is worth fighting for. Right is worth dying for, even if the battle is fought after the treaty is signed. The hero here is not Andy Jackson. It certainly was not Jean Lafitte. Let's just say, once a pirate, always a pirate. The hero here was the Stars and Stripes. It's a matter of allegiance. Just as the men from Barataria took down their pirate flag and hoisted up Old Glory, so have the countless millions who came to these shores, traded the symbols of their mother country, and began saluting the American flag. We must all rally around something. Our symbol is red, white, and blue. It flew over the fort at Baltimore, and despite being tattered and torn, it was still triumphantly standing there when morning came. I leave you with one thought. The young people of today crave leadership. They crave a symbol. Will they go abroad to join a foreign cause because they want to be accepted? Will they find some splinter group in the dark recesses of the internet and join a group of sick minds because they feel at home there? Will they immerse themselves in propaganda and automatic rifles and plan a day of killing at a school or mosque or shopping center because they feel it's the only way for the world to know who they are? It grieves me to think that the manner they need to carry is already within reach. It's there in their classroom. At least I hope it is. It longs to be held aloft and sung to. But why should any young American reach out and take up the flag of their fathers when they don't know what the symbol means? When someone belts out our national anthem at a sporting event as if it were a personal recital for themselves and not a loving hymn to a grand and glorious symbol of freedom, it teaches America's youth nothing. If the story could be told, if the men and women who lived in the time of the Revolutionary War could be as real to them as today's rock stars, if the story of the tattered but triumphant flag of Fort McHenry could be so understood that young people would love to retell that story, if the heritage of America, the suffering of the Founding Fathers, the efforts of our men and women in uniform, if the courage of our astronauts, the convictions of the leaders who brought America to where it is today, if all of these things could be understood, America's young people wouldn't seek another flag. The flag of Baltimore, New Orleans, Iwo Jima, the flag planted on the moon would be enough. If only the story of America could be taught as the wonderful story it is, and not as a recitation of dates and names from a dusty book, this would be a vastly different America. What a story we have to tell. It's a shame we've forgotten how to tell it. This is Jimmy Weldon. I love you. God bless you, and God bless America.
For more, go to KIWANISPalmSprings.org.